What's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode of the Young Nets podcast. Today, we're going to be continuing with our playoff series prediction videos, and we're going to be focusing on the Nashville Predators and the Vancouver Canucks. So, this is going to be our second Western Conference that we'll be covering, and this is going to be a matchup, in my opinion, that will be closer than most people think. And we'll get into why we think that, but look, the Nashville Predators, they had David Poley for so many years as their general manager. They transitioned with a new general manager who is a familiar face in their organization, Barry Trotz. Barry Trotz stated that he wanted to make this team very competitive, and he also voiced his displeasure throughout the season when the Nashville Predators were very underwhelming. A lot of people were suggesting that they should have just embraced their rebuild, but it seemed like he didn't want to do that. And what moves of signing a guy like Ryan O'Reilly as your first line center during the offseason, that's when you knew that he was serious and he wanted to contend. Um, at the deadline, he added depth scoring in Jason Zucker, Anthony Beauvillier. He also, got rid of Yakov Trenin, who traded into Colorado Avalanche. So, he was wheeling and dealing essentially. But this team, on paper, not the flashiest, but Phil Forsberg has been very pivotal to this team, having a 94-point season, but they've prevailed altogether. And you can never count the team out that has great goaltending and a great defensive structure. Ryan McDonough, being um, a player that's played many playoff games before with the New York Rangers and Tampa Bay Lightning. Roman Josi, who's had playoff experience and arguably one of the top defensemen in the league. You have Jeremy Lauzon, who is one of the best, defensive defensemen this year. And I think he even set a record for most hits um, ever in a single season in history of the NHL. You have Dante Fabro, who for so many years, had a hard time making a name for himself and solidifying himself as an NHLer, and he has done that this season. They added also Luke Shen during the offseason as well, with experience. And just taking a look at their goaltending, well, you have UC Saros and Kevin Lankinen, and also Yaskarov as your third goalie option. So you look at this team, and they have a lot of depth in terms of every single position. So when we saw them, squeaking into a playoff spot, a lot of people were saying, well, oh, come on, this is a team that, struggled for years in terms of scoring. They just got rid of Matt Duchene, and look what he's doing with Dallas. This can't be a competitive team. Well, we were all proven wrong. The same way that we thought Winnipeg was not going to make the playoffs, the Nashville Predators were in the same boat, and both those teams end up making the playoffs. One last thing I would like to mention about the Nashville Predators before I hand it off to Zach and he does his coverage on the Nashville Predators. Um, After the All-Star break, the Nashville Predators were um, 21-7-3. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is the best um, record past the All-Star break in the whole NHL. So obviously, this is a team that's deserving of a playoff spot. This is a team that's 10th for goals this year, scoring 3.24 per game. Their penalty kill percentage is 22nd, so 76.9%. Their power play is 16th, 21.6. So this is a team looking at them, they're very deserving. You'll see Saros, you know, 906 save percentage. Struggled in the beginning of the season, but in the second half, helped the Nashville Predators and carried them into a playoff spot. So that's my analysis on the Nashville Predators. What are your thoughts, essentially, Zach, on the Nashville Predators?
Well, I think the Preds were a team going into the past offseason that had didn't have high expectations coming into this year. They signed Ryan O'Reilly as an unrestricted free agent, adding Gustav Nyquist as well. And actually, sorry, that was the year prior. But so they add Ryan O'Reilly as the number one center to this team. And if you look on this team on paper, they're there was, in a lot of people's eyes, there wasn't a lot of offensive firepower. Philip Forsberg has been doing his thing, has been struggling with his health for a large part of career. They get a full season out of him. Ryan O'Reilly is producing as good as he's ever produced. Shout out to Gustav Nyquist, who's having a career year offensively. You have Tommy Novak doing his thing. Luke Evangelista has proven to be a consistent commodity. 22-year-old young player who was drafted in the first round, still has a lot of potential. And on their back end, Alex Carrier has had a good season this year. Ryan McDonough has been back to form, and obviously Roman Josi, the captain of this group, has been fantastic as ever. But I want to talk about their start. So for the first 15 games, they started with a record of 5-10, which was, it was a tough way to start the year. And during UC Staros' start to the season, his first 15 games specifically, he boasted a below 900 save percentage. So this team wasn't trending in the right direction. And they were about a 500 hockey team coming out of the holiday break. But on February 7th, their season really started to turn around in their favor. And what I mean by this is that they went on a historic franchise leading run, by the way, of 18 consecutive games while earning a point. Their record was 16 wins and 2 overtime losses in that span, which was fantastic. And they completely turned the corner on their season. And honestly, not a lot of people expected this, because it looked like a pretty stale veteran group with not a lot of depth scoring, or not a lot of spunk and offensive output from this group. And they really turned things around. Brunette, the coach, deserves a lot of credit for this group. He's going to be a candidate for the Jack Adams. They play really good hockey away from the puck. This is a very good defensive team. And now they're in the position that they're in. They're going into the playoffs. They had a 99 or 98 point season this year. Correct me if I'm wrong here. They're going in with fantastic form, and they go against a team in Vancouver who, I want to draw the comparison, because these are two teams that have been playing excellent defensively 5-on-5 this year. Vancouver on their end with Rick Tocchet, they've been another team that have been a complete revelation this year. After last season, their decor had a lot of question marks. A lot of fans were screaming for them to add a couple of defensemen, because they had one of the worst decors in the league last year. But they add Philip Pronik via trade. And, well, you have the lines projected here, but he rested the last game of the season, but Philip Pronik is going to definitely be back on that first pairing with Quinn Hughes. And so they add Philip Pronik and complemented, obviously Quinn Hughes is the star over there, but complemented with some pretty good depth this year. They acquired Nikita Zadorov as well mid-season, and they've become a top 5 defensive team in the entire NHL, as well as a team that generates a lot of offense via Elias Peterson. Brock Besser had a 40-point season. JT Miller, kind of an emotional leader, getting a point pretty much every game, and not more, having 100 3-point season this year. Like, Vancouver really broke out of a stinker, because they weren't even in a playoff contention last year. They were kind of like a meh team that didn't really participate in the wild card hunt last year. And now, so we have two teams here that have completely turned around, and I'm excited for this playoff matchup. So I'm going to alley-oop it back to you and kind of get your take on, like, who do you think is gonna have the upper hand in this series, and what do you think the fans should look out for?
Well, look, Vancouver, for the most part, have proven that they've been consistently good. Yes, they've had slip ups, but when you have such a hot start to the season, it's only normal. You look at the Nashville Predators, they had a very bad start at the beginning of the year, and they got hot at the right time, which will enable them to make the playoffs, right? So it comes down to firepower, playoff experience, goaltending. In terms of goaltending, Thatcher Demko returns to form this year and has been very, very good consistently
Yes.
throughout the year. Apart from his injuries towards the end of the year, he just recently came back, so hopefully he's fully healthy to get to play very well in his playoff series, because they're gonna have a hard time if Demko is not on his game, and we saw Demko when he's not on his game, and it's not pretty. So I and there was also rumors that he was going to be moved at one point and whatever, and they end up sticking with him. And it's funny, you look at UC Saros, a guy who, like Demko, um, received in the past Vezina candidate votes, and you know seemed like he was having an off year as well, and they were thinking about trading him too, and they stuck with him, and he prevailed, and he's been kicking ass ever since. So in terms of the goaltending, I would say it's going to be a goalie showdown. It's probably going to be one of the best and the closest in terms of all the matchups that we're covering in the first round. In terms of the defense, that's where it starts to get a little bit more interesting, because Vancouver's more offensively minded. They have weapons. You have Philip Roenick, you have Quinn Hughes on defense, right? So you
Yeah,
have your one and your option 1 and 2 in terms of guys that are able to get it done offensively. You also have, Tyler Myers, who's had a really good bounce back year, especially playing, third pairing minutes. He's been great, plus 16. You're looking at his numbers last year, people were like chasing him with pitchforks last year. They
everybody thought
completely
he was
hated it.
washed. Basically,
Yeah.
Vancouver
And
fans
this
hated
year,
his guts.
yeah. And this year he bounced back. Why? Because of the system that Rick Tocchet plays. He's made this team a lot better defensively, because this is a team that was more offensively minded, and it wasn't working under Bruce Boudreau, right? A guy like Connor Garland, who, was rumored to be traded at the beginning of the year, 20 goal scorer, one of the best players this year. So they have the depth, they have secondary scoring. They're a very offensive minded team, but they, wherever they lack defensively, they adjusted. I'm not saying they're the best defensive team, but they're good enough to compete against the top teams in the NHL. This is why they finished in the top 10 this year. And this is why for majority of the season they were in the top 5 in terms of best, teams in the league. What kind of bothers me a little bit is that they kind of lost their footing the moment they acquired Elias Lindholm. I don't think he's been a great fit for them. They gave up a lot of pieces. They ended up trading Kuzmenko, and Kuzmenko, yeah, was up and down a little bit with Calgary, but last like 15 games of the season, he went off. He ended up finishing with a little bit over 20 goals. So he's a 20 goal scorer this year. And Elias Lindholm didn't even hit 20 goals. And you would think that, Lindholm going to the Vancouver Canucks, where there's so many offensive weapons, it increases production to what it was when he was playing with the likes of, Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk on the first line with Calgary a couple years ago, and it fell flat on its face. And in terms of Nikita Zadorov, when they acquired him too, like there was an expectation that he was going to help them defensively, and he's only at a plus. He's basically even at a zero. So and there was also talk that we were going to flip him at the deadline as well, because they weren't satisfied with his game, and there was even talk they wanted to flip Lindholm. So the two guys that they acquired in the season did not pan out, but there's guys that they did acquire beforehand that did pan out, and that is Teddy Bluger, who I think fit very well in a bottom 6 role, won a Stanley Cup with the Vegas Golden Knights. You have Sam Lafferty, who was literally traded for scrap. Toronto just wanted to get rid of his contract, but he found a secure place in the bottom 6 with the Vancouver Canucks, and has come up clutch when needed. P.I. Suter, this is a guy that they signed as a UFA towards the end of the summer, had basically a 30-point season. So they added role players, depth players, secondary scoring wingers to make the team better. Even Hoglander, a guy who was horrible under Bruce Boudreau, finally found his footing. Dakota Joshua, what a surprise. And people have been, arguing and probably clamoring that Vancouver for majority of the season had like the best third line in the league, where they had um Dakota Joshua, um if I'm not mistaken, Sam Lafferty, and the other guy was Pi
Well,
Suter.
Connor Garland, wasn't Connor Garland on that
Oh, yes,
line?
it was Connor Garland. It was Connor Garland, Sam Lafferty, and Dakota Joshua. That was like at one point, like that was the best third line in the league, and
Yeah, well,
deservedly so.
They brought in Elias Lindholm to basically, round things out a little bit. They mixed and matched their lines, and they were trying to find a fit with him, right? It didn't work out. Hasn't worked out offensively because if correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he only had 22 points in his short stint as a Canuck. Elias Lindholm did, but there is reason for more optimism on his front because he did finish the year off strong. The last 5 games or so, he's been given more responsibility on the power play, and he scored 2 goals and 3 assists in that span. So he's finishing off the year off strong. Vancouver fans are hoping that he's going to be a nice complementary piece for them offensively in the playoffs. But yeah, you have a team in Vancouver who, like you mentioned before, Thatcher Demko had a really tough year last year, and he's almost bounced back and like hit the other end of the spectrum here. He's had a fantastic season. Um, with him being in Nets, they've won 35 wins. Like that is nothing short of impressive here. And you know, if I'm comparing the two teams head to head here, I look at it this way: on one end you got Quinn Hughes, on the other end you got Roman Yossi. That's a wash. But if you look at the rest of their comparative decors, I give the edge definitely to Vancouver because of how dynamic Hronik has been in a contract year for him, and how the complementary pieces have kind of given them, the depth that they've needed. It's not a knock on Nashville's decor. I just think Vancouver's is better. And if you compare the forwards, I just think Vancouver have more dynamic players. Other than the top line for Nashville, yes, they have good depth all around. Like I mentioned, Evangelista offers scoring, Novak as well, Colton Sissons, guys like that. But Vancouver has got, they have JT Miller paired up with Brock Besser on the first line. Just those two guys alone is super dynamic on a line. You got Elias Lindholm, who's going to be maneuvering the second line, who you could basically put with anybody because he's just that much of a little genie out there. And you got Elias Lindholm on the third line with Connor Garland. So they really spread it out, and they have really nice scoring depth. And these are two teams that play really well defensively and are extremely physical. Both teams in top 5 in the league in hits per game. So this is going to be a really gritty, physical kind of Western Conference type series. But if you look at special teams, the edge is definitely to Vancouver because they've been thriving in that front all year, while Nashville have been average. So these are two similar teams by a lot of accounts, but Vancouver just they have the edge in a lot of they have a slight edge in a lot of areas. So if we're saying that the goaltending on both sides is going to be like Thatcher Demko could steal you a couple of games in the playoffs, and maybe UC Saros has that ability as well, then I give the slight edge to Vancouver in this one. I think Vancouver, they've proven on a more consistent basis as well this year that they've been able to get it done. So I would say Vancouver would win this one and probably a six game series. I think well enough of Nashville to be able to get 2 games, especially the momentum that this group is carrying off their run that started in February. But Vancouver, I think is going to have the edge in this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say Vancouver are definitely the favorites, and I do believe that, they're gonna win. But I do agree that it's also gonna be a 6 to 7 game series. I'm undecided on how long it's gonna go, but with fantastic goaltending, with both teams having great role players, even though I would say that the Vancouver Canucks have more offensive weapons. And like you said, like their special units are a lot better. Um, the edge would go to the Vancouver Canucks for me. But at the end of the day, if there's going to be an upset this series, like in the first round, I would see that the Nashville Predators could potentially knock out the Vancouver Canucks. I think that's
Wow.
one. I think that's one team that we could potentially see knocking out a juggernaut and ruining a lot of people's brackets. But I will give the edge to the Vancouver Canucks, but I have a lot of respect to Nashville, a lot of respect to Andrew Brunette, such an underrated coach. I think the New Jersey Devils missed the boat on that guy when they let him go, and they ended up firing Lindy Ruff, and Brunette would have been a fantastic option as a replacement, but Nashville gets their guy this offseason, and he's been great and a big reason to why they've been successful. But Tommy Novak having a great season this year, Nyquist, like you said, career year, Ryan O'Reilly, being put into a position where there's life that's injected into him. Same thing with Ryan McDonough. They're not you know aging players that are just a product of the times, where like they're just too slow, they're not able to keep up. Like we saw last year, Ryan O'Reilly took a big step back with the St. Louis Blues, and he regained a little bit of form in the Toronto Maple Leafs. But this
Yeah,
year we're starting to see a little bit we're starting to see a lot more of the Ryan O'Reilly that won the Stanley Cup with the St. Louis Blues a couple years ago. McDonough, obviously not getting the amount of like points that he normally gets when he was with the New York Rangers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, but like being plus 19, that's fantastic as a
and
defenseman. So like,
granted, yeah, he's been really good offensively down the stretch. I think he's start in January. He only had something like 12 points in the amount of games that he played, and since then he's gotten up to I think 30 points this year. That's a guy. I kind of agree with you in the sense that people thought the time was passing by with him. He had done what he had to do with Tampa, and he had won the cup over there. And now he was on the back end of that of his expensive salary and maybe riding the coattails a little bit. But he's really found a way to establish himself again this year, and it's really nice to see because a lot of people counted on Nashville. So like I I see why you think that Nashville could pull up the upset on this one because the ingredients are there, right? But I think you have a team in Vancouver who are hungry as well because this game one actually is going to be the first home game that they host in Vancouver since the 2015 season, and the reason being is that they did make the playoffs in 2020, but they were a victim of the bubble situation. So they're going to be up on their feet. That's going to be a nice energy boost, momentum creation for the group. And these are the two only teams as well that didn't make the playoffs last year that are making it this year because the other teams are all repeating. So both teams are going to be hungry, and I just think Vancouver have been so good this year. I think they're gonna keep it going. They can't let this great season they had mean nothing. I think they're gonna at least get a playoff series win this year.
yeah, and I like the point that you made before, where like they're very similar. These are two teams that like made a lot of moves, in terms of their front office, and also on the roster in these last couple of months, but specifically in the off season. And there's a lot of like what ifs, like is it gonna pan out and whatever, and it it did for both, and both of them reached heights that no one thought they would reach. No one thought that Vancouver would be a top five team. People said there was a chance they made the playoffs, but we didn't know that they were gonna be this good. Nashville Predators. No one knew they were gonna set a franchise record in terms of having, points in 18 consecutive straight games,
Yeah,
and that they were gonna
absolutely.
have one of the best or the best, record after the All Star break. No one knew that. No one. So both these teams came in with something to prove, but it all comes down to what they have available to themselves. And I think that if someone goes down in Vancouver, they have options. Like for example, you have um, Noah Jocelyn, who played a good chunk this season, who's relegated to an AHLer for most of his career, and with Carson Soucy, who missed a good chunk of this year that they signed during the offseason, and he's been such a pivotal part to how well they've been playing defensively. Noah Jocelyn was able to come in and help this team defensively as well, and finally gain some respect around the league as a pretty decent plug-in NHLer, and Mark Friedman too. Being traded from Pittsburgh to Vancouver, finding himself in and out of the lineup, but still managing to be a +4. And it's very hard to do that when we're seeing a lot of goals being scored in today's NHL, and the game is faster. And JT Miller being a +32, Quinn Hughes being a +38. Like, most of these guys on Vancouver are in the pluses, and that goes to the system that Rick Tocchet has put into place. And in terms of the Nashville Predators, their depth is not as great, but they have fantastic role players that just wear out their opponents defensively. The thing is that if Philip Forsberg, Nyquist, Yossi, O'Reilly, and even Novak to a certain extent are shut down offensively, can the other guys keep up with Vancouver's depth? And I think that's where Vancouver has the edge, and that's what gives them, in my opinion, my vote in winning in a 6 or 7 game series. But Nashville is going to give Vancouver a run for their money. This is not going to be an easy series, um, and I like both teams, so it's going to suck to see one of them go. And also, I would like to mention that. This is my favorite series. I think we're gonna get the most out of this series. Apart from the Boston versus Toronto series, I think we're gonna see, like you mentioned, a classic physical Western matchup that we haven't seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah, this is really going to be exciting hockey. And even the other series as well. I know you mentioned Toronto, Boston, but the two Florida teams meeting in the playoffs is always super interesting, and that's a very intense rivalry. Um, there's just so many, and look in the West as well. Vegas versus Dallas is another one, right? Because you have two juggernauts, and one has got to go in the first round, and that is just how it works now with this playoff format with the wild card system. But back to this series, one last thing I'll note is that Thatcher Demko has only appeared in 3 playoff games, while UC Saros has appeared in almost a dozen. So the edge and experience goes in the favor of Nashville in this series. But in terms of the regular season head to head, all these games, noted were contested before Nashville went on their run and started playing really well. The edge was 3 games to 0 for Vancouver. So those are my last final thoughts. And despite everything we just mentioned, I think I'm confident Vancouver are going to get the job done in this series.
Yeah, very tight battle, but I think Vancouver will edge out the Nashville Predators. And both teams have a lot to be proud of, especially the Nashville Predators, who on paper may not look like a playoff team, but they got the job done. And you know, kudos to them for setting a franchise record in terms of most consecutive points in franchise history. So, guys, we'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Please mention if you're voting for the Vancouver Canucks to win the series or Nashville Predators. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And we have 2 more matchup videos to cover. The Dallas Stars versus the Vegas Golden Knights. That's going to be an interesting matchup. We're going to see one of the top juggernauts, out in the first round. And then you have the Edmonton Oilers and LA Kings for the 3rd consecutive time in the first round, which I'm not really looking forward to because, anyways, I'll get deeper into that on that video. But
It's going to be
we're probably all
fun.
feeling the same thing. But anyways, guys, thank you so much once again, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Young Nets podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for watching.